Fairies, ghouls, goblins, and ghosts. It's the time of year I love the most. Yes, it's Halloween again, or Samhain if you prefer. We've discussed previously the history and origins of this holiday. For the Celtic people, it's Samhain, the time of year when the veil between our world and the world of the spirits, or fairies, is the thinnest. The time when fairies or goblins would drag you away to their world, leaving a changeling in your place. The jack-o'-lanterns were meant to scare away the evil spirits and protect your home. The treats that we give out today were left out to appease the gods or spirits of your house. The costumes were meant to disguise you from any malevolent creature, making them think you were one of them. In Italy, they celebrate All Saints' Day on November 1st, a time when they remember the dead. In Mexico, on November 2nd, they celebrate the Day of the Dead. And in North America, on October 31st, they celebrate Halloween, taken from All Hallows' Eve, from the time of the settlers with clear origins from Samhain. I love this time of year. The air feels magical, and anything seems possible. Now, I love a good ghost story. My favorites are always the ones where people move into a new home that is old, beautiful, and mysterious, and begin experiencing strange occurrences soon thereafter. This first story is my own first-hand encounter. 2 years ago, my husband and I decided to be free spirits. We were tired of the North American way of life, working multiple jobs, and constantly exhausted. We decided to take advantage of the booming housing market and sold our home in Canada and purchased an old run-down palace in southern Italy with hopes of renovating and turning it into a bed and breakfast. The area is absolutely beautiful. We're up in the mountains with a view of the Tyrrhenian Sea, surrounded by olive groves and valleys. The house itself is one of the first two buildings to be built in our village, and it dates back to the 1600s. It was originally a large palace and a home, then it was a factory, then a school, and in the last century it was owned by the same family who had it as a family home, a summer home, and then a doctor's office. By the time we purchased the house, it had been empty for 10 years. All of the furniture, dishes, and personal items were frozen in time, just as they left them. When we first walked through, everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. The antique furniture beautiful, and we could see the potential in this place. The doctor's bedroom had a wooden bed and a large wooden wardrobe. When we opened the wardrobe, we found two paintings wrapped up tightly in paper and ribbon. I had a strange notion that we shouldn't unwrap them, but then my husband did. I remember returning to the room, opening the door without the lights on, and being startled by a face looking back at me. The old man is the one I saw first. An old, frail, bald man with sunken eyes surrounded in dark circles. It reminded me of those old Nosferatu movies, the bald vampire with the long fingers. The other painting was of a woman in an old Victorian-style dress. Dated 1811, I believe. The name on the painting was Julia. Her eyes are a striking blue, and she has strong, almost masculine features. We hung the paintings in what is now the library. They have that eerie feeling of watching you as you walk by. Everyone who sees them makes a comment. I don't know if they used to live here, but out of respect, I thought it would be nice to keep them in the home. Soon after this, we started noticing a few strange occurrences. Most of them not too frightening, only unexplainable. The first was I was washing the dishes, and I decided to take my rings off so they wouldn't get tarnished. After I was done the dishes, all my rings were gone, probably because of our cat, might have knocked them down. We found every single ring except for my engagement ring, which is an oval shaped antique style. We searched for hours, every square inch of the third level. And then my husband got tired and went to bed, but out of guilt, I couldn't stop looking. I wouldn't be able to sleep. We were on our hands and knees, searching every square inch of the floor, every light on. And out of desperation, I said out loud, "If there are any spirits in this house, please help me find this ring. It's very important to me." Immediately after this, I walked into the living room where I had searched maybe 30 times, and there the ring was, sitting on the middle of the floor, glistening in the light, a place I had looked multiple times. The first summer we were here, I had some relatives come and stay. My uncle was staying in the far bedroom, and he said he was laying in bed with the sheet up to his waist, and he actually watched the sheet move up his body to his chin. There was no one in the room, and it wasn't him, so it was as if someone was tucking him in. He said he wasn't afraid. It felt as if someone was caring for him, maybe a motherly figure or a nurse. In that same bedroom, my husband has told me he has heard voices, a young female voice, not unlike my own. Just last week, actually, he was bringing the dogs in because there's a door to the garden right beside that room. And he called them in. He said, "Come on, guys, time to come in." And behind him, he heard a voice repeat him almost word for word, saying, "Come on, time to come in." He thought it was me and that I had come home early from work, only it wasn't me, and I didn't. None of these occurrences are very frightening, only strange. The only time I felt a little uneasy was last January 1st, on New Year's Eve. I went out to a friend's house. There's a family that come a few times a year to their vacation home, and they invited me over for dinner. After dinner and fireworks, around 2 o'clock in the morning, I believe, their daughter and her boyfriend offered to walk me home. I offered to give them a tour of the house since they were here and they had never seen it. And they wanted to. They were very excited. So I gave them a tour of the second floor, which is the most ancient floor. The third level is like an apartment, but more of like an attic. So we were walking through and we went through the library and they saw those paintings. And they began to make some comments making fun of those paintings and the appearances because they are quite striking. I laughed it off like it was just funny and a joke. And then I said goodnight, bolted the door, and went up to bed. The next morning, I went to open the door to the staircase, and I found that I was locked inside. This would be impossible for me to do because you have to lock it from the outside. The key is on the other side of the door. It's one of those old skeleton keys that you have to turn around. You have to actually turn it 3 times to lock the door, and you have to hold the door tight. So they would have had to be on the other side doing this. I was curious and unnerved. I went to the other side of the house, went all the way around to unlock the door. I searched the house thinking maybe someone had gotten in, but there was no one here. There was only me. The front door was still bolted and there was no one there. I wondered if perhaps the spirits of the paintings were upset with my friend's comments, and I actually made an apology to them just in case. As all of you know, I love folklore. These stories have been passed down orally for generations before we ever started writing them down. Some of these stories might be memories, and I find it fascinating to ponder what could be true. Ghost stories are a fun subsect of folklore. Some call the ghosts fairies, spirits, demons, residual energy. Either way, they make for a thrilling story. Since I'm living in Italy, I thought I would go with an Italian ghost story. Poveglia Island is a small island off of Venice, just like Murano or Burano. The difference is that Poveglia is completely abandoned. It is called the Island of No Return. It was once a thriving, populated place, but in 1378, during a war between Genoa and Venice, its people were relocated. It was uninhabited until the time of the plague. During the Black Death, anyone exhibiting even the slightest symptoms were sent to Poveglia to die. And these weren't hospital-like conditions. They were just trying to get rid of them. Bodies were decomposing on the streets, and new arrivals were left there to suffer among the corpses. Eventually, they were all burned and thrown into mass graves. It is said that the island was also used to execute criminals by drowning them. In 1922, they renovated some buildings to be a home for the elderly. However, it ended up being a home for the mentally ill, an asylum. Any type of abnormal behavior was considered a mental illness, and these people were sent to the asylum with no possibility of return. The island isolated these people, and they were never allowed to return to society. It was also said that doctors performed evil experiments on the patients, subjecting them to pain, torture, and lobotomies. Some of these patients were reported of seeing shadow figures and hearing voices, but no one would listen to them as they were considered mentally ill. One particularly cruel doctor was tormented by ghosts, could be past patients, criminals, or plague victims. They drove him crazy to the point where he jumped from the clock tower. Legend says the fall isn't what killed him. He was choked before the fall. To this day, you can hear the bell tolling from across the bay, even though the bell was removed years ago. In 1969, the asylum was shut down and has since been abandoned yet again. No one is allowed to visit the island, but some still do. Paranormal investigators or curious tourists, but every visitor has left in fear or shock at their experiences on the island, and many have gone missing. People claim that they have been followed, scratched, and to see shadow figures. There are even specific spirits that people know of. For the past 400 years, they've seen one they call Little Maria, a little girl who roams up and down the beach crying. In the asylum, there is Pietro, a man with 2 amputated legs that used to race his wheelchair through the hospital halls. People claim to hear his wheelchair racing down the halls. There's also a male figure they call Federico, who grins wildly and laughs loudly. Another woman is seen with a terrified expression on her face. The following is an alleged first-hand encounter on the island of Poveglia that I found on Reddit under the name r/nosleep xBambi. In the summer of 2013, I visited the island of Poveglia. I will be changing my name and others mentioned since it is strictly forbidden to visit the island. The 2 nights we were there were the most terrifying experiences of my life. My hope is to share my story so others will heed my warning and stay away. It's very simple. Your curiosity will most certainly lead to your inevitable, gruesome death. Fresh out of college, my fiancé Sebastian, my friend Sahar, her husband Michel, and my brother Anthony and myself Octavia decided to check out Venice while vacationing in Europe. My brother had recently gotten out of rehab, and I thought it would be great to go on an adventure. And me being an art and culture fanatic, of course, Venice was our last stop. When we arrived in Venice, the sights were amazing and the wine exquisite. The whole atmosphere was relaxing. 2 days of sightseeing and Michelle was already bored. We had never really spent time together and had never really gotten along. Nothing personal, no backstory, just never connected. So when he suggested this crazy haunted island that's forbidden, and if you're caught, you spend time in foreign jail, I obviously declined. So we continued sightseeing, occasionally butting heads, and our loved ones having to intervene. Sahar must have given him a stern talking to, because the last free day we had in Venice, he talked about how he had paid a local fisherman to take us around the lagoon. I apologized for my behavior, and he accepted and apologized as well. The day was great and the weather perfect. The rays of sun were warm on my skin, and the misty breeze from the water was cool and refreshing. I looked at my brother's face, and he was smiling. I hadn't seen him smile in so long. It wasn't until I turned to see my fiance's face go pale that I realized where the boat was going. Off in the distance was an island with tall buildings and a bell tower, and we were headed straight for it. Sahar's husband was a genuine jerk. I jumped up, almost losing my balance, and punched him in the jaw. "What is your problem?" I screamed. I was overwhelmed with anger. Even my brother was surprised. The boat came to a stop, and the man started yelling at Michelle in Italian, and Michelle just nodded, his face grave. I cursed myself for taking French instead of Italian. The fishermen shooed us off the boat and onto the shore of the island and took off, leaving us behind. Sahar was in tears, mumbling things like, "We never should have come to Italy." Michelle turned to us, his head down. "I'm so sorry. He said he's not coming back for us because he doesn't like commotion that will attract police. So he's going to have a friend come and pick us up soon." I couldn't believe my ears. "We're going to be stuck here? For how long?" I started to shiver from the cold. The sun was starting to set and it was getting colder. "Maybe there's someone staying on the island and that's why it's illegal, like trespassing on private property," my fiancé said. My brother's face lit up. "If that's the case, we can get off the island without getting in trouble. We can explain we got dumped here and we were just curious tourists who got lost." I knew he was probably wrong, but I would have much rather spent the night dealing with police issues than be stuck on an island we knew nothing about, with nothing but the clothes on our backs. Making our way to the buildings, we found cigarette butts, a few wrappers, and an old shirt that had been worn by the elements. These small things gave us hope that we weren't the only ones on the island. Oh, if I only knew how right we were. We were completely unprepared for the night to come. When we had finally crossed the canal separating us from the buildings, it was pitch black. So here we were, finding ourselves using our cell phone flashlight apps to walk through the dense shrubbery. My hope of finding someone had evaporated into thin air as we found our first building. Rain had already started trickling down from the sky, and we agreed that walking through the rain in the dark would serve us no good. This particular structure looked like some sort of church, but it was apparent no one had used it in a very long time, as it was crumbling. Sebastian, Michelle, and Anthony scoped out the area, and we decided to make a small area in the cleanest, driest part of the building. Sebastian had been a Boy Scout and was able to start a small fire. Not enough for a heat source, but enough to give us a little light and some peace of mind. Worn out from the day, we all huddled together and tried to sleep, and I drifted off. I awoke in a sense of panic. It was pitch black, and I have severe anxiety regarding the dark. I couldn't see anything. It made no difference if my eyes were closed or open. I jolted upward, only to be slammed back down. It was then I realized I was harnessed to a bed. My breathing escalated. Where was I? How did I end up here? I looked over to my left at a nearby window where the moonlight shone in. The rain had stopped just as quick as it had come. That's when I saw it standing in the corner. The reason I say it is because I'm not sure if it was male or female or even human. It was in a black gown and had on a mask similar to a bird, slits for eyes, and a very long beak. I didn't scream or thrash out, I just laid there, looking at it. It moved awkwardly towards the door and disappeared into the darkness. A sudden feeling of hopelessness overcame me, and I began to sob. After what felt like an hour, I mustered up enough courage to try and free myself from the harness with my teeth. It tasted like dry blood, leather, and dirt, but I kept at it, eventually freeing one arm, which I used to undo the other harnesses. I climbed out of the bed and fell to the floor immediately. Why were my legs so weak? I crawled over to the moonlight and noticed I was in a hospital gown. What the heck? How I had not noticed this before. I began examining myself to make sure I was okay. My wrists and ankles were bloody from the harness. I started sobbing again and rubbing the dry blood off of me. I began to stand up, balancing my arm on the windowsill. I pulled myself up and forced myself to stand straight. I didn't understand why my legs were so weak. The harnesses shouldn't have been affecting me this much. Had I been drugged? What had I eaten today? At this point, I was very slowly and quietly making my way across the dimly lit area. By the time I actually reached the doorway leading into the darkness, I had regained my ability to hold myself up without staggering like a zombie. It was so dark. That's when I heard it. It still haunts my dreams to this day. Down the hall into the darkness came the most blood-curdling scream. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and it didn't stop. Scream after scream after scream came from whatever was at the end of the darkness. It wasn't really the scream that scared me. It was the fact that it sounded like my brother. My flight or fight kicked in, and I jumped into the hallway, instantly regretting my decision. I couldn't see. I had no sense of direction. I tried going in the direction of the screams, arms wide in front of me, feeling around for walls and obstacles. "Anthony," I whispered, afraid of what might hear me. "Anthony, tell me where you are." I was crying and cringing at every scream. I was getting closer. I rounded a corner, and the screams were hurting my eardrums at this point. My heart was beating faster than a hummingbird's. It felt like it was going to burst through my chest. I thought I would never escape until I saw a dim light coming from underneath the doorway. I couldn't breathe. That room was where Anthony's screams were coming from. The second I stepped into the room, everything became silent. There, strapped to an operating table, was a cut-open body surrounded by surgeons, in the same bird mask as the one I had seen. And the body on the table didn't belong to my brother. It was Michel. He was staring at me in the eyes, along with all of the surgeons. I had walked in during their experimental surgery, and now they were staring me down with hand drills and scalpels in hand. I wish I could say I ran into the room. I wish I could say I fended off the masked doctors. I wish I could say that I saved Michel, but I didn't. I just stood there, overwhelmed by fear. My stomach was in my throat and I couldn't breathe. The smell was unbearable, charred flesh, vomit, and mold. The masked doctors started moving towards me in unison. And still I didn't move. I couldn't. They were 6 feet away now. I was consumed with the feeling of dread and the possibility that death was staring me in the face. 3 feet away now. It wasn't the fact that they were moving towards me that made my skin crawl. They were silent, and it seemed as if their motions were skipping, like a poor quality YouTube video still buffering. By the time I snapped out of my paralyzation, I was too late. I was grabbed by both arms by 2 of the doctors. The strong smell of potpourri hitting me in the face. I looked up to the one on my left as it stared back down at me silently, pleading with my eyes. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to kill me, please." They started dragging me out of the room and back into the dark hallway. No matter how much I screamed or kicked, I wasn't strong enough to break their hold on me. I was going to die. I leaned my head into my right arm and started to cry. There was no sense in being quiet anymore. My pleas of mercy were useless. We turned a corner, and I realized we were going back the way I had come. They were taking me back to the same room I had woken up in. I cried harder, muttering, "No, please." I was forced back down into the same bed I had spent forever trying to escape. They started harnessing my foot. No matter how many times I tried to get up, I was immediately slammed back down with so much force it made my head spin. They strapped my wrists in and tightened it so tight that it cut off my circulation. I squeezed my eyes shut and clenched my teeth together. The lack of circulation I felt in my feet and wrists were enough to make me think they were going to fall off. After a few moments, my eyes shot open, scanning the room. All I could see were green dots from squeezing my eyes tightly shut. But from what I could see, the mass doctors were gone. I felt hopeless. I was back at square one. I started squirming around against the metal mesh of the worn-down bed. Think of a metal hospital bed with no mattress. It was painful, to say the least. But my goal was to loosen the harnesses just enough to let my body breathe. Thankfully, the harnesses were old enough to give a little slack. This should have been the point where I tried to get myself out of the brown leather that strapped me down to the bed. But I was afraid if I escaped again, the doctors would come back, as if I was some troublesome patient that couldn't stay in their bed. Even if they didn't come back, the straps were loose enough to allow proper blood flow, but not enough to maneuver my teeth to the leather. I just lay there in the darkness crying. I'd cried long and hard enough to cause my head to hurt and my eyes to feel swollen and heavy. So I did what any other non-sane person would do. I went to sleep. When I finally came to, the morning sunshine shone through the room, illuminating everything in the welcoming sun. When I sat up, the straps seemed to caress my skin ever so lightly and fall off, as if they had never been tightened at all. Or more frighteningly, someone had come into the room while I slept and undid them. I decided not to overthink it. The sunlight gave me a sense of hope that drove me to get up and examine the room more thoroughly. There were multiple beds in the room, most of them corroded and turned upside down. In the far corner of the room, I noticed a chair that made my stomach drop. It wasn't the chair that scared me, but rather what was sitting on top of it. There, in a neatly folded fashion, were my jeans, tank tops, jacket, and shoes. My eyes darted to the doorway. Nothing. I slowly made my way to the clothes, eyes never leaving the doorway, and began changing into them. Once I was fully dressed, the sudden realization of loneliness overcame me and my mind drifted to Michelle. Oh my God, Michelle. I quickly and quietly made my way to the doorway and peeked into the hall. I crept down the hall and around the corner, sticking to the walls and staying on my toes as much as I could. I felt like I was in a James Bond movie on a mission, not wanting my enemy to detect me. When I made it to the room, I saw Michelle and I froze. It was empty. The smell of charred flesh and potpourri was no longer there. There was no blood on the ground, no doctors, and Michelle was not on the now clean operating table. There was no one. I was alone. I walked inside and began looking around for clues. I continued my search, kicking away fallen boards, leaves drifting in from the window. There was nothing, a few needles, some trash. This particular building seemed to be empty, and I was safe, as much as my mind would let me think. I made my way through a large doorway and kept looking around. I figured that the church-like structure had to be on the south end, since it was the first initial shelter we found yesterday. With every step I took, I became more excited and determined to meet up with everyone and get the heck off this island. Everyone except Michelle. My stomach turned at the thought of having to explain to Sahar what happened to her husband. I made my way through some shrubbery and I searched for the old church. On my way, I found some vines with some grapes on it, and I was so hungry that I started to eat a few. While maneuvering myself over a branch, I somehow lost my footing and landed with a hard thud onto the soil. As I pulled myself up, brushing off dirt from my jacket, the sight before me made me want to vomit. Slightly unearthed from where I had fallen were a few remnants of human skulls. I gagged and hurried away, bracing myself against a tree. The thought that there was a vineyard above who knows how many bodies was enough for me to vow never drinking Italian wine again. I looked up and could see the church in view. With a few deep breaths, I made my way to the doorway. Upon looking inside, I couldn't help but notice how serene it looked, how peaceful. I went inside, and the silence of the empty building shot daggers through my heart. They weren't here. I had been so sure, with no doubt in my mind that they would be here, never giving it a second thought. I slumped to my knees, leaning my body against the doorframe. My body ached. I was so sore and hungry and tired. My mind raced through my thoughts, trying to think of where Sebastian, Anthony, and Sahar might be. If I was hungry, they were probably too. Maybe they went out searching for food, or for me. I decided to get up and go search for them. I looked around, scanning the area, getting a feel for what was around me. I crossed my arms because I was getting cold again, and decided to make my way to the closest building I saw, being as silent as possible because I feared what might hear me. I already felt like I was being watched. I didn't want my big mouth to confirm it by calling out to anyone. I could see it was going to be dark in a few hours, and clouds were rolling in. There was no way I would be able to find my group before dark. I was going to have to stay another night. The alarming fact of this put me into a weird sense of panic determination. I ran over to one of the side rooms, hoping maybe I could barricade myself in one, but I wasn't having much luck since they all had windows. I opened one of the doors to the main room where I had seen all of the ovens and stoves before, and smiled a little. It had a few shelves and was very compact, but it had more than enough room to fit at least 3 people, and a small hole in the ceiling, so if I managed to start a small fire, I wouldn't burn the place down, and there would be warmth and ventilation. I got to work on preparing to hold myself up in that small pantry for the night to come. Little did I know my efforts would make no difference. I awoke in a puddle of water yet again, in a panic. The light rain from outside trickling down from the hole in the ceiling onto my face, my hair dripping with sweat and rain. The small fire consisted of twigs and leaves I had managed to create earlier was long diminished, leaving me in darkness yet again. I could hear shuffling footsteps behind the door. I struggled with the old lighter that I had found, trying to get it to light. The footsteps stopped, and I stopped fidgeting with the lighter, covering my mouth. In the silence, it felt like my breathing was much louder than it was. I sat there, straining my ears to hear of any movement. The footsteps started again and faded away. My body was so cold, and my clothes were stuck to me, and I sneezed. I heard running footsteps stomping the ground and a large slam right into the door. I jumped with fear and slid into the corner. I couldn't tell if I was crying or if it was the rainwater. The footsteps shuffled away once more, and I sat there terrified. Whatever was out there knew I was hiding in here. I wasn't sure if it was gone, but I forced myself to stay in that corner until I thought it was safe. An hour and a half later, I got the courage to stand. I know what you must be thinking. I should have stayed in that room until dawn. However, whatever was outside knew I was in there. How long before they returned, possibly with help? I did not want to end up strapped down to a hospital bed again, or worse, an operating table. My best chance was to make a run for it and cross the bridge to the other half of the island. With a few deep breaths, I burst through the door and made my way out of the building, tripping over nothing and everything. At this point, it didn't matter how much noise I made. My location was compromised regardless. I made it outside and fell into the mud. The moon gave me a little light, and as it peeked through the black clouds. Covered in mud, I made it to my feet and let out a very loud scream. Standing about 20 yards away, I could make out the Venetian masks staring straight at me. I ran to the direction of where I was fairly sure the bridge was, constantly looking over my shoulder for pursuers. The rain hitting my face, and it felt like needles. My lungs were on fire due to the icy air, and I've never been much of a runner. I came to a stop, leaning over to try to catch my breath, and I started dry heaving. I looked up and could see the bridge. I was so close. A branch snapped behind me. Someone was following me, and they were close. Not turning around, I started towards the bridge with a slow jog, which eventually turned into a full-blown sprint. When I reached the bridge, I turned back and scanned the tree line. To my surprise, no one was there. But then again, it was very dark, and the trees gave anything in there the advantage of being cloaked in darkness, while I was in the middle of the bridge illuminated by the moon. The crickets stopped chirping one by one, and everything went silent. A low humming sound started off, quiet, and started to grow. I couldn't make out exactly what it was, but it sounded like it was coming from all around me. I picked a direction and started running through the thick, grassy field behind me. It felt like my feet were sinking into the ground. I had no idea where I was going. It was so dark. I tripped and landed onto the soft, muddy soil with a puff of dirt and ash filling the air. I was covered from head to toe in mud. I stood up and looked around while spitting mud out of my mouth. I couldn't remember which direction I had come from. It didn't help that I could barely see the hand in front of me either. I pulled out the lighter from my back pocket and tried to get it to light, but there was no use. With all the rain, it wasn't going to light. The humming noise was beginning to become louder, and I could see a small flickering light off in the distance. "Help!" I screamed as loud as I can and began running towards the light. I continued to scream as the ground beneath me changed from dirt to wood. I could hear the water lapping off of the wooden beams below, the lights getting bigger. I screamed louder. The humming sound I heard earlier was getting louder now, and the light was shining on me. I waved my arms, screaming for help. The light was blinding me now, and I shielded them. I could hear people yelling in Italian as the light passed me. I couldn't see as my eyes were unable to adjust. An arm reached out to me, and I grabbed it, and I was yanked onto a boat. My mind was racing, my eyes adjusting, and the boat was moving now. An Italian woman, probably in her early 50s, approached me and gently put her arms on my shoulders. She whispered to me in a soft voice, words that I couldn't understand. "I'm so sorry I don't speak," I started to say as she interrupted me with a more soft-spoken Italian. I felt like I was a small child from the way I was being talked to. I sat there in shock as the boat sped through the water, leaving Poveglia Island in the distance. She left me for a few moments, rustling in the cabin below, and returned with a blanket, which she wrapped around me. She grabbed my hand and led me down a few steps into the small cabin, as she yelled up to the man driving the boat while smiling. I took a seat on the couch that lined the wall. I was still shaking, unsure if it was because of the cold or the terror that I felt from earlier. The woman began humming to herself softly and grabbed more blankets from the cabin. She returned to me and I huddled back a little. To be honest, I was still trying to grasp the concept of being rescued. She sat down next to me and smiled. She threw the blanket over my shivering body and said one single word in English that made my eyes water. "Safe," she said in a thick accent. I was safe. I could hear commotion outside the boat, and the woman hurried me out onto the top deck. We had docked. I was immediately greeted by a warm hug by Sahar. I could hear my brother crying out. The sky was starting to gray as the morning birds chirped happily, and tears rolled down my eyes as I was met with the familiar scent of her perfume. Still standing on the dock were Anthony, Sebastian, and Michelle? Impossible. "Michelle?" I stuttered in disbelief. I was angry now. Everything I knew or had thought I knew was suddenly thrown into a hurricane of hysteria in my mind. "I watched you die," I cried as I let go of Sahar and climbed my way off the boat onto the dock. Everyone looked at me with confusion and fear. Sebastian approached me with a raised eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" I took a step back off as the boat sped off in the distance. "What do you mean?" I yelled. "We got stranded. Don't you remember?" "We had to sleep in that church." I pointed at Michelle. "You were cut open on an operating table, screaming for help. We got separated the first night there." Everyone was silent. Anthony took a step closer to me. "Octavia, you disappeared 2 days ago after saying you had to go to the bathroom." He spoke slowly. "No, we all went together. We got stranded." I trailed off in false confidence as everyone stared at me. "Octavia, Michelle had to ask around with your picture to see if anyone had seen you. It wasn't until we were directed to a fisherman yesterday that we had any idea of where you were." Apparently, you had paid him to take you on a tour and threw yourself into the water as the guy was passing Povalia Island. He tried calling out to you, but you just kept swimming towards the island, so he turned around. Octavia, we were never on that island with you. I was at a loss for words. We had to pay that couple to search for you because they wouldn't let us near the island. They said it was too dangerous for tourists, Michelle said. My head was swimming in an ocean of confusion, and it was giving me a headache. I tried to retrace my thoughts of everything that had happened those 2 nights. Sahar and Sebastian exchanged frowns. Sebastian threw his arm around me and kissed me on the forehead. You just need some rest. I smiled despite my inner turmoil. They continued to counsel me the entire night and the whole flight home the next afternoon. But when I would try to bring Povalia up, I was told it wasn't good for my health and that I shouldn't think about it anymore. To this day, no one believes what I experienced, not my family, not my now husband Sebastian, Sahar, or Michelle. Anthony won't even look at me anymore. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. I'm not crazy. I'm not a harm to myself or others. Sometimes I wake up from night terrors. Most nights I'm afraid if I go to sleep, I'll wake up strapped to that hospital bed again. I've tried to push those memories to the back of my mind, to bury them, and eventually I was able to move forward. However, there's always been one thing that has never clicked right, that I couldn't stop thinking about. Something that just never made sense to me. Sahar had said I had paid a fisherman to take me to Povalia, but how would I have been able to communicate that? I don't speak Italian. So what do you think, guys? Was Octavia telling the truth and somehow her companions have no memory of the 2 terrifying nights? Or did some entity lead her there, wanting to show her the island and all of its terrible secrets? And if so, why did it let her go? To end off the episode today, I'm going to share a poem by Robert Irving Howard called Dead Man's Hate. They hanged John Farrell in the dawn amid the marketplace. At dusk came Adam Brand to him and spat upon his face. Ho, neighbors all, spake Adam Brand, see ye John Farrell's fate. 'Tis proven here a hempen noose is stronger than man's hate. For heard ye not John Farrell's vow to be avenged upon me, come life or death? See how he hangs high on the gallows tree. Yet never a word the people spoke in fear and wild surprise, for the grisly corpse raised up his head and stared with sightless eyes, and with strange motion slow and stiff pointed at Adam Brand, and clambered down the gibbet tree, the noose within its hand. With a gaping mouth stood Adam Brand like a statue carved of stone, till the dead man lay a clammy hand hard upon his shoulder bone. Then Adam shrieked like a soul in hell, the red blood left his face, and he reeled away in a drunken run through the screaming marketplace. And close behind the dead man came with a face like a mummy's mask, and the dead joints cracked and the stiff legs creaked with their unwonted task. Men fled before the flying twain, or shrank with bated breath, and they saw on the face of Adam Brand the seal set there by death. He reeled on buckling legs that failed, yet on and on he fled. So through the shuddering marketplace the dying fled the dead. At the riverside fell Adam Brand with a scream that rent the skies. Across him fell John Farrell's corpse, nor ever the twain did rise. There was no wound on Adam Brand, but his brow was cold and damp, for the fear of death had blown out his life as a witch blows out a lamp. His lips were writhed in a horrid grin like a fiend on Satan's coals, and the men that looked on his face that day, his stare still haunts their souls. Such was the fate of Adam Brand, a strange, unearthly fate, for stronger than death or hempen noose are the fires of a dead man's hate. Thank you for joining me, everyone, for another episode of Tales of Fae and Folklore. Have a happy Halloween.